Let's talk about ayahuasca. So, ayahuasca is making a lot of headlines, getting a lot of attention. It's being seen as a panacea, as a bucket list experience, and all kinds of things. And as somebody who's been a healer for over 20 years and who's very interested in personal transformation, I just want to give you a little idea of what I think ayahuasca is all about. First of all, I've done ayahuasca. Plenty. A lot. I stopped counting at probably around 70 ceremonies and did plenty after that. I've been to Peru twice on intensive dietas where you go into the jungle and basically fast almost. You have no salt. You have no scented anything for the entire time, and you do ayahuasca every other day. And it's grueling. Now, first thing to know about ayahuasca, and you probably already know, if you've done a lot of psychedelics or any other psychedelics, for the most part, it's really fun. And ayahuasca can be fun too. Absolutely, it can be great. But chances are that's not what's going to happen. Now, it also depends on how much of a healing path you are on, and it depends on just what it wants to give you. The thing to know about ayahuasca is that it seems to have its own consciousness. I'm not getting into any debates with anybody about that, but the messages that you get from ayahuasca can be so profound and so different than anything you would tell yourself that you definitely have the feeling that you are communicating with another entity. Now, that other entity might just be a higher level of yourself. It might be because you're able to tap more of your brain, so you don't need to have any kind of supernatural beliefs. But the messages that you receive and the way that it goes to work on you, it's incredible. Before I did my first ceremony, I had this issue arising that I knew I needed to work on, and that issue was the pain that I had held inside from when my father left when I was 4 or 5 years old. And what happened at the time was I basically went silent for a year. I held everything in. I didn't release the grief through tears, and everything just got blocked in me, and it kind of started from there. So it was really the core wounding of my life. And as I was preparing for this ceremony, I kept putting the intention out there to the ayahuasca to just help me clear this. And I kept saying famous last words, no matter what it takes. So 2 weeks before the ceremony, my girlfriend dumps me and the dam broke. It was like all the tears that I had never cried, now I was crying them. And thank God, because it really released so much suffering that I'd been walking around with, that had been behind me gaining weight and having weight issues my whole life, and had been behind all the issues of my life were basically traceable back to that moment of my dad saying, "I'm leaving." And so then when my girlfriend said, "I'm leaving," it was able to connect. I was able to connect with that pain in a way that was totally cathartic. Now, it was some of the most horrible couple of weeks of my life between that breakup and the ceremony. Because it was, I had been storing things up for 40 years that needed to come out. And as soon as it happened, I just decided, I'm not going to hold back a single tear. So when I went to the ceremony finally after a couple weeks, the ayahuasca gave me really beautiful messages, really patted me on the back and patted me on the head and gave me a big hug and was really sweet. And it helped heal the things that had been unleashed. And it started a long process of healing that, we're never done. And my second through sixth ceremonies were actually in the jungle in Peru, in a very remote area. And I'm not going to tell anybody where it is and how to get there and whatever. I'm not spreading that. Don't ask. I won't tell you. But it was a major trek into the jungle, beyond all kinds of communications. I mean, I took a radio the second time I went there and got zero reception. And so it was remote. It was very remote. The nearest town was like 3 shacks on the river that was an hour away by boat. Put it that way. And so during these 5 ceremonies that I did in the jungle, the first one was beautiful. The first one was bliss. The next 3 were hell on earth. And the hell, well, let me digress. I grew up hearing about bad trips on LSD. I did plenty of LSD when I was younger, and I never had a bad trip. And it was always fun. It was always exciting. And it was never negative. But there was always that idea of the dreaded bad trip. One time I had a bad trip on mushrooms. But it wasn't that horrible. It was just like I just had to keep moving. And, it was things coming up. Emotions coming up. But with ayahuasca, you should expect to have what people would call a bad trip. You should expect that most of the time. But it's not a bad trip. What it is it's things that are stuck in you, emotions that haven't been processed, beliefs that are like a big boulder in the stream of your life that are messing everything up. And what happens is when you do ayahuasca, a lot of times you just get plunged into the absolute horror of what's stuck in you. Not only do you go right back to the feeling that you had the moment that belief was set up. So let's say you were 3 years old and you were playing and you were in absolute bliss, and then your dad hit you. And you were shocked, and your whole world fell apart. You were in grief. You were in shock. You didn't know what to do. You didn't know what to think. Okay? And imagine that really set a certain marker in your psyche that has colored every moment of your life since then. With ayahuasca, you realize how that stuff works. And what happens is you not only go back to the horror of that emotion, but you do it while you're tripping, seeing very intense visuals oftentimes, feeling on the brink of death or insanity. When you experience these things through ayahuasca, you get a good idea of what insanity must be like. But you also get a good idea that everybody's walking around with a lot of insanity inside. We all are on that spectrum. And it's just a matter of some of us are able to control it a little bit more. But, you know, push the right buttons and weird things come out of pretty much almost anybody you've ever met. So what happens is, think of it as like if there were these little nanobots that were programmed to go after something in your body, right? Imagine you injected these little things. I'm getting an image of that commercial with the scrubbing bubbles, right? Imagine you had these little tiny things that, for example, they went in and they just ate up cancer cells or something like that, right? Fat cells. And then imagine once they have their orders and once they're in your body, they go to work and there's nothing that can stop them until the job is done. And so, excuse me for the noise outside, but even if it's painful, even if you beg for it to stop, it's not going to stop until the job is done. So what causes the bad trip on any psychedelic is saying no to that process. Is saying, I want this to stop right now. It's not going to stop. And it really pushes you to the brink of questioning your sanity oftentimes. Because remember, as this is happening, you're really high and images are swirling around and all kinds of thoughts are pinging around your brain. Now, they've shown with psychedelics that it basically lights up your whole brain. So that normally our brain works through certain networks. Things travel along certain roads. With ayahuasca, it's as if everything becomes a road. And so areas of the brain that generally are sitting there dormant now are really active. That's why you have synesthesia, why you can smell the sound or taste the colors or things like that, because your brain's activated in a different way. But what it does is it goes after something that you need to let go of. Now here's the crux of the matter. And this is the essence of healing in general. The things that you need to heal, for example, insecurity, chronic fear, whatever your issue is, feeling not good enough, shame, guilt, all that stuff. You have those issues because at some point in your life and on some level of consciousness, you believe that these things are necessary for your survival. Now, logically, if somebody says, you think that feeling not good enough is necessary for your survival, you'll say, no, I don't think that. I don't want to not feel good enough. I hate that feeling. But the fact is, it wouldn't be there if there wasn't some part of your consciousness that thought that it needed to be there. And that has been holding on to that energy for a long, long time. And holding on tight because it was a life or death thing. And so what ayahuasca does, it takes you right back to the origin. Energetically. Now, you might not see the moment of your dad hitting you or whatever the thing was, mom screaming at you. You might not see that, but you'll feel it. You might be seeing all kinds of weird, swirly, fractal things, you know. But you're going to go to that moment. And it's almost like the ayahuasca is pulling that issue out of you, and you are fighting for dear life to hold on to that issue because you think without it you're going to die. You think the ayahuasca is killing you as it's yanking this tumor out of your body. But it's not killing you. And as you do it more and more, you learn sometimes, not always, you learn to cooperate with the process and to let these things go faster. But sometimes what happens is you hold on the whole ceremony until it finally is able to heal all or a part of the issue. And that whole holding on is your bad trip. Because it's yanking it out of you and you're holding on to it. And that drama just gets a lot of weird thoughts involved, a lot of emotions. It's absolutely terrifying. Ayahuasca is not for everybody. Ayahuasca is not for people who want to stay comfortable in the status quo. Ayahuasca is not for muggles. See my muggle management videos for that. It's for the type of people who, I don't know, who crave adventure on one level, who understand that they need to do deep healing, and who are brave. They're not fearless, but courageous. This is not something that's ever going to be a party drug. This is not fun. There is throwing up involved and or diarrhea. It's not glamorous, people. Okay? Not only might you be throwing up, but you're listening to others throw up all night long. One thing interesting about that is that you think that you're going to have this reflex of throwing up when you hear other people throw up, but when you do ayahuasca, it just seems like, at least for me and a lot of people I've talked to, it's not really an issue. One thing you realize with ayahuasca is how much fear is stuck in you and everybody else. Because they call ayahuasca the vine of the dead. And my theory is because, most people go through periods when they take ayahuasca of thinking they're going to die. And it's not just a thought. It's a terrifying reality. Many times I have checked my pulse. It's crazy, I know. To see if I was alive. Even though I knew that obviously if I can move my hand over to check my pulse, I must be alive, right? But I did it anyway. And because my theory about that is that the places that ayahuasca takes you, these are places that you've never been while in a body. These are places that you have only visited in spirit, which means when you visited these places, you were dead. And so when you're back in that place, there's something in your brain that says, I must be dead if I'm here. And that can be terrifying. But on the other hand, the messages that ayahuasca gives you are so brilliant sometimes that you think, I could have never come up with this. This is genius. And it will show you things. Now, this isn't one of the genius ones, but the first vision that I had with ayahuasca was, it was weird. It was like I'm standing out in an open field, but then there's one of those little telephone tables with a telephone on it right next to me for some reason. And it's not really me, it's whoever, anybody, but kind of me. These things aren't linear. And looking up kind of like, if there is a God, give me a sign. And then what happens is as if God turned up the dimmer on the whole scene. And everything got brighter. And then went back to normal, right? Just like somebody turned up the dimmer and then turned it back. And then the person standing there, kind of me, kind of not me, whatever, generic stand-in human. The person standing there said, see, I knew there was nothing. And the message was kind of like, this is what you guys do. And it was funny, because it was just like, we could show you all the miracles on earth, but your ego is completely able to ignore it. One thing very transformational that it did, and it was gut-wrenching. And this was my first ceremony also. It showed me yelling at my kids. It was just like a scene. It wasn't even a real scene that had actually happened. It was just kind of like a generic. But it's like I'm yelling at my daughters, and they're just standing there destroyed by my anger, just with a tear coming out of their eye. And I felt so guilty. I felt like throwing myself, there's just, it's not that I felt suicidal, but that it was just the kind of thing where you just want to throw yourself on the ground and beg for forgiveness forever. And it just showed the devastating impact which I had suffered as a child. And when I went home, and the first time I saw my kids after that, I got on my knees and tearfully apologized for all of my anger. And we had a really beautiful moment there where they started crying, "No, Daddy, you're not." Right? And they reassured me I wasn't that bad and whatever. I'm like, "No, I'm terrible." And after that, I mean, I got so much closer with my kids because of that. Because I saw that ugliness in me, and I had to tell them, and I had to fix it to the best of my ability. And I had to get to the core of what a totally messed up person I was in that moment. It wasn't about blaming myself. I mean, it was a little. But it was just about seeing it, seeing the ramifications. And it was just, the truth was just right there. And if everybody could just have one moment like that in their lives, it's life-changing. I have the most amazing relationship with my daughters now. Not only because of that, but that added a whole new dimension to it. Because what I realized later is I never got that. How many of you got that? How many of you had your parents tearfully apologizing for the way they acted? I hope a lot of you. I really hope so. But I never got it. I just got a bunch of gaslighting. And so ayahuasca can take you there. And ayahuasca can take you, flying through other dimensions, and no matter how bad it is, it's amazing when it's over. It's just like when you keep hitting yourself in the head, and then when you stop, it's amazing. But, no, it's really an amazing thing when you've gone through this. And one thing that's really interesting is that you go into a circle, and usually it's at night, it's dark, you're in a room with people. A lot of times you don't know those people. You might not know anybody in the room. And you go through this whole ceremony together. And you come out, and like everybody's hugging, and everybody's just acting like friends, and it's just like you've all been through something together, but it's something else. Like something psychic happens in the room that I can't explain, but it's a beautiful thing. Now, ayahuasca can be used for other things. I went into every ceremony as a healer, using ayahuasca to go after my next issue. And I'm always working on something. And so I would just go into the ceremony having an intention around that. So I was always working. This was never a pleasure cruise for me. For a lot of people, it is a lot more pleasurable than that. Lucky them. But one thing, there are a few things that you need to watch out for with ayahuasca. One thing is, it's not guaranteed to bypass the ego or weaken the ego or make you spiritual. It depends on you. It depends on your path. It depends on all kinds of things. It's not necessarily gonna break through all of your avoidance. If you're delusional, it might just reaffirm your delusions. I can't guarantee that it's not going to. Usually it won't. Usually it's going to rip them to shreds, and you're not going to like it while it's happening. But I have seen people that just have beautiful experiences every time. They don't handle any of their issues, and or barely, and their ego just gets strengthened by it. So it's not guaranteed to be spiritual. It's not guaranteed to be anything. Another thing, the messages that come through are filtered by your conscious mind and your ego. The messages are not verbal messages that come in words necessarily. Sometimes they are. But a lot of times it's a certain feeling, realization that you put words to. And that's where it can go wrong. That's where it can be self-serving. And so a lot of times people get these messages that they deify. They put these messages on a huge pedestal. Well, ayahuasca told me, so therefore, we'll always be discerning. Just because ayahuasca told you something doesn't mean it's true. Okay? You have to weigh it against everything else. Now, doesn't mean it's false either. Because usually ayahuasca is going to go after your ego to open you to spirit. But not every time. And you're not going to interpret it that way every time either. So beware of false messages or falsely interpreted messages. If you want to do ayahuasca, number one, I'm not going to help you find out where to do it on any level. I'm not going to recommend anybody. Don't get in touch with me for that. I do psychedelic integration work, and you can find that on my website, andysway.com. Just look under psychedelic integration. And what I do for that with clients is that I'll do a phone session prior to their ceremony, and then one afterwards. So it's an hour before, an hour afterwards. It's a package. It's $100 an hour, like all my phone sessions. And so in the hour before, I'll help you set intentions and get ready for it. And the hour after, I'll help you kind of integrate the messages and, cut through the weeds of some of the things that could be misleading. And then also just work on what's the overall message and what needs to be integrated. Because there's a lot to integrate after ayahuasca, and some people need more than one session afterwards to integrate. It can be very destabilizing to an ego that's a little calcified. So anyway, the other thing is follow the rules of your shaman. And different shamans have different rules, and I'm not claiming that I always followed mine. But I can tell you, a lot of people have had bad reactions not following those rules. And if you're in the Western world, you might not really have access to your shaman the next day. So if you don't follow the rules and you have a reaction, your shaman might be long gone. They might be doing a ceremony somewhere else, far, far away, and not there to help you. So follow the dietary restrictions, and definitely follow the restrictions around medications. And if you have a shaman that doesn't give you any of those restrictions, then run. For example, if you take antidepressants and ayahuasca together, you could die. This is no joke. I'm not going to go into the pharmacology because I am not very good at any of that. I don't want to even say the wrong thing, but certain drugs have bad reactions with ayahuasca all the way up until death. And any bad reactions that don't result in death, well, you can be sure that you're going to be suffering physically, mentally, emotionally, in a horrendous way for hours and hours that feel like eternity. You don't want to do it. Don't mess with ayahuasca. Don't get cute. Don't think, oh, I've done a bunch of shrooms and, whatever. I did a lot of psychedelics before I ever did ayahuasca. And I've done a lot of ayahuasca. The next time I do it, I'm going to probably be scared. And that is appropriate. Okay? Not to wallow in fear, but it's that healthy fear. If you're storming the beach at Normandy and you're not afraid, then there's something wrong with you. Same with ayahuasca. Okay? Not every time. But, it's not a hard and fast rule with ayahuasca. It probably is with Normandy. But the thing is, you want to follow the rules. There are dietary restrictions and other things. And you want to follow the rules in the ceremony, like don't touch other people, don't talk to other people, don't whisper to other people, don't try to communicate in any way with other people. Stay in your own energy. It's really important. Now, there are some types of ceremonies where they have the lights on and people are talking and processing whatever. Okay, I haven't done that. I've done the traditional ceremonies in the dark, eyes closed, with a shaman, music going on most of the time. So, I've heard of other methods where they do it differently. Fine. Then do it that way when you're there. Great. I have no judgment about these other methods. But, so anyway, those are some things to think about. Just a little bit of information. Also, just the best thing to do when you're going into a ceremony is set an intention, but realize that ayahuasca might override your intention. It might have other things in store for you. And then say yes to whatever's coming up and let everything go. It will be a lot easier on you if you do it that way. And if you need help preparing for a ceremony or integrating one, go to my website, andysway.com, psychedelic integration, and get in touch with me, set something up, and I'd love to help you out with it. Thanks for watching to this very long video. Didn't mean it to be this long, but that's what happens when you talk about ayahuasca. All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Bye.